All right, our third game here on Thanksgiving Day is the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. Steven, I said the aforementioned teaser leg that every book is going to have liability to this week. This is the second leg of it. It is going to be the Lions down to 1.5. It is going to be the 49ers down to a point, and it is going to be everywhere. It is like this teaser. It just screams obvious. It screams get it in your account. And whatever, I'll be the donkey that plays it. And if it loses, it loses. But I have a very, very tough time seeing this 49ers team healthy losing to the Seahawks at this point with the way that the Seahawks are playing. And not to mention, we're getting a Geno Smith that is not going to be 100%. Now, it's, how severe is this whole tricep? I don't really care. It's his throwing arm, and it's his throwing arm on a short week. And so even if that makes Geno coming in at 90% instead of 100%, the way Geno's playing this year, he can't afford to play. He can't afford to be 10% less than what he's doing right now. So you're giving me the Niners down to a point, coupled with the Lions down to 1.5. It's just too much for me to pass up.
I'll be a donkey with you, buddy, because I have it in the account as well. I just don't think Seattle is ready for prime time here to compete with the top teams in the NFL. I know they beat the Browns defense, but they also didn't have to face a very good offense in the Browns in that game. This is, in my opinion, currently this week, the number one team in the NFL, at least in my power rankings. When this team is fully healthy and assembled, this is the most complete team in the NFL, in my opinion. And if you kind of look at their season in chapters, there's reason to believe that. From week 1 to 5, before the crazy win game in Cleveland, this offense was number 2 in the advanced metrics, basically only behind the Dolphins, who had a 70-point game in that sample. Number 1 passing offense by advanced metrics with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy by EPA is like lapping the quarterbacks in the NFL this year. He's been impressive, at least in terms of the advanced statistics. And that's in the defense was top 5 by EPA. Then they have the 3-game losing streak, which I think you can make pretty valid arguments to shoot holes into whether or not those were outliers or actually concerns moving forward. I think they were outliers. The win game in Cleveland, Brock Purdy gets concussed at Minnesota. The turnovers, granted, did pop up and hurt them against Cincinnati, but they still moved the ball at will to a tune of more than 8 yards per play against the Bengals. And in those games, they did it without their left tackle, Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel. Now they get back healthy against a Jags defense that gets a lot of respect this season. They also have the Tampa Bay game. Past 2 weeks, back to being top 3 overall, top 2 passing attack, top 3 defense by EPA. They lost to Funga, who's one of their best defensive players, but I think the key to this whole thing is their pass rush, and it's a really, really good pass rush now that they added Chase Young as well. So I just don't see anything more than an average football team with Seattle, and now their quarterback's banged up. Now their starting running back is banged up. Really not all that impressed with Charbonnet, to be honest with you. And Tyler Lockett has been on the injury report on and off with a hamstring injury as well. So, yeah, 6.5 would be a bet here. If you can't get it, it's an easy teaser leg for me.
Yeah, Adam, we see Seattle, and look, I can admit when I'm wrong. I had a futures ticket on Seattle to win the division. I have an over 9. Looks like that is like I'm praying for a push now at this point for that was Seattle. It was the thought being that they would just continue to kind of take some steps forward, and it just really hasn't been the case. It's just a lot of the same as last year, right? And there really hasn't been those steps forward, and so with that, we kind of get just the same version of this team that struggled down the stretch last year. I actually would love to hear if you have a differing opinion than me on this. I just think that these are two teams that are going in completely different directions and probably even in different classes when it comes to the NFL as far as talent goes.
I actually am going to give you a slightly differing opinion. I'm going to ask a question to both of you that's a bit of a rhetorical question, but if you have a strong opinion, go for it. If the market is this confident in San Francisco, why have we not gotten 7.5 here? This hit 7 and stopped, and I get why mathematically 7.5 is a big deal. But if we are this confident that San Francisco is in a different weight class than Seattle, I think the market should have been to 7.5 already on this game, even on the road, because you have to choose what you believe about Seattle in order to bet this game. And I'll go straight to full disclosure. I would need the 7.5 to go Seattle, but at 7.5, I would take Seattle. There's something about this Seattle team that scares me in this kind of situation, because you can look at last week's game against the Rams and you can see everything that has been enormously frustrating about Seattle. In the first 25 or so minutes of that game, that looked like a top 5 team in the NFL. They really did have the kind of offensive efficiency that you said, oh, this is the Seattle I've been looking for all year long. And then they went on to play a dreadful 35 minutes after that. Geno Smith was hurt. You had to watch the Drew Lock experience. Kenneth Walker was hurt. They had some disadvantages, but they also just looked terrible roundly. Now, I think if you play San Francisco in this spot, if you're laying the 7, you're definitely at a spot where you are buying San Francisco, I think, at nearly top of the market. And I get it. They looked the part against Jacksonville last week. They've looked the part multiple times in these kind of spots here this year. I don't know that I can get there with San Francisco this week. Maybe I am a little bit too risk averse when it comes to both of the teaser legs that you guys are on, but I actually don't want them. Detroit, to me, there is enough game script here where the Green Bay Packers can put up a bunch of points against Detroit that scares me. And I have seen good Seattle just enough to wonder, on a short week when Kyle Shanahan doesn't have the same amount of game planning time that he usually does to wreck people, what are we going to get out of San Francisco? Could you see Brock Purdy's turnover-worthy plays come home to roost a little bit the way that they had prior to Jacksonville? So all of that is to say that I think there is a case to be made for Seattle. I'm not here pounding the table saying, you guys are insane. Why are you doing this? No, it's none of that. But I do think with a total of 44 in today's NFL, if you take 7, I can't argue with you, but I would even be curious to see, with a couple of minus 115s out there on those 7s, if it gets to San Francisco 7.5 pregame. I think that's a play on Seattle.
Yeah, it is. It might get there, and mainly because of just the volume of people that are going to be betting into this game. On with it being the third of the primetime games, whatever, it wouldn't shock me. I know books are going to be super hesitant to get to that 7.5. They don't want guys, specifically pros, who've been able to get in on both sides of the 7, and so that's going to be something that's going to be pretty rough for them. Just to kind of answer your question as to why we haven't seen the 7.5, I think they're really, really, really going to be very hesitant to try to get that 7.5, considering it did sit at 6.5 for a little bit, to where you're allowing people to come in on both sides of the 7 in a game where a 7-point outcome seems very likely, right? I mean, it seems like very within the range of possibilities here. So I think we're talking more liability standpoint when it comes to all that. But for me, there's just this lack of confidence for me in Geno right now. And it's, I think if we're just being objective in this, like, as bad as the quarterback play has been in the NFL this year, he's still just middle of the pack, right? I mean, I think we would rattle off 10, 12 names that we would want ahead of him. And that's including the guys that, that are playing currently as opposed to the guys that are hurt. So I don't know, just a lot for me to overcome with some of the stuff I've seen from Geno. What are we now at? Are we now at 8 straight games of a turnover that he has been responsible for, be it a fumble or an interception or something like that or whatever? And so he's basically giving the ball to the other team at a pretty high rate. I just don't know. I can't get there with Seattle, and trust me, I want them to, I need them to win games. Trust me. Like, I want them to win games, but I just can't quite get there. Steven, one other thought here in this one is, like, I guess if I'm trying to play my own devil's advocate, I can see where Seattle might bust the 7 or the 7.5. I do not see a win. Like, I'm serious. Like, I have tried to play my own devil's advocate here a million times and talked myself into what is the path for victory here. And it would take a 3 turnover game by Purdy. And again, we just hadn't seen it. Call it luck, call it whatever, all that stuff. We just haven't seen that. And so I'm just not going to assume that Purdy's just going to all of a sudden fall off a cliff.
you in the sample of Brock Purdy as Niners starting quarterback, there's been a couple of games where he's turned into a pumpkin, but overall, you would have lost a lot of money at this point continuing to bet for Brock Purdy to have a bunch of interceptions and lose games. It's happened a couple times, and that's been it. So they were competitive for a half against the 49ers basically last year and have not been able to put it together for 60 minutes. I hear Adam's arguments. I think for me, if I was going to take the devil's advocate argument and come in on Seattle at 7 or 7.5, I'd have to believe that they'd get some positive regression with their red zone offense, because that to me is what's really held them back. Seattle is below 50%, ranking 22nd in the NFL in red zone offense. And in their last 3 games, they're even worse than that. They're down to 40% in the red zone. And this is not anything new for them. This was an issue last season as well, where they were below 50%. So if you're going to keep pace with the 49ers, you better be getting 6 and not 3 when you get to the red zone.
It's fair. And I would just go back to this, something I've talked about throughout this season. I think red zone efficiency stats are a little bit skewed the last year, 2 years, since the defenses have kind of adjusted the way that they're playing in the middle of the field between the 20s. So caveat, not to say that that's really pushing back on Steven. It's more just to say that I'm taking all of my red zone efficiency thoughts with a grain of salt here right now.
Last thought for me here too is, and I also have a coach of the year on Pete Carroll as well, but like, dude, he played for a 55-yard field goal last week. It's just like he settled for a 55-yard field goal last week. And that to me, like something's just, you see him and Belichick and all these like old school coaches. Like, I do wonder if the game is like starting to pass these dudes by. Like, I honest to God, I do wonder if the game is starting to pass these guys by, because like some of the decision making to me, where you're literally, there was 30 seconds left in the game, and like you ran the ball up the middle and then you spiked it with 9 seconds left to play for a 55-yard field goal. It's just astonishing to me. It's like, it is crazy town to me. And you wouldn't try to get 4 or 5 or 6 more yards is just baffling. And so I don't know. I'm losing faith too in some of these coaches, which also I think has crept into kind of tainting the overall team for me. And I know that Carroll isn't like affecting in making game changing and game affecting calls like repeatedly throughout the course of a game. But, little things like that, man, that is that really sticks with me with making a decision like that.
I know we spent a lot of time on this game. I just want to give one more perspective on futures for Seattle. They're sitting at 6-4, and the playoff race in the NFC is putrid. I don't know like who you want to back there, but Seattle's 6-4, and their next 4 games are Niners twice, Dallas, and Philadelphia. There's a very real possibility they're 6-8 and need to win 2 of their last 3 against Tennessee, Pittsburgh, or Arizona. Maybe only need win one of their last 3. It's almost 2-1 on Seattle to miss the playoffs here. So I'm pretty confident they're going to lose 4 straight here to get to 6-8. And then who knows what happens in the bottom of the wild card picture in the NFC.
Yeah, no, that's a good look for sure. And that's certainly a range of outcomes that is very likely as well.